My name is Joy Warland, and I'm the consultant for continuing education in small and rural libraries at the Vermont Department of Libraries. Welcome to this workshop. We're excited today to have guests from the Preservation Trust of Vermont, the Vermont Arts Council, and the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation to talk about renovations, particularly renovations to historic buildings, which of course many Vermont libraries are. So this is always an important topic, but it's especially relevant right now because the Department of Libraries is poised to make capital project grant funding available to libraries. This funding comes from the ARPA Capital Projects Funds, which includes $16.4 million to support capital projects to Vermont's public libraries. So we are hosting this workshop today to help libraries begin planning and to be in a good position to apply for this funding when it becomes available. The current status of this initiative is that the department has submitted all of the required documentation for the funding to the Treasury and is waiting for a response before we can actually begin the subgrant process to libraries. So we hope to open the grant application in spring of 2023. So this will be a competitive grant application for funds that will need to be used by the end of calendar year 2026. And as with the previous ARPA grants, there'll be a lot of training ahead of time on the grant process. So you can look forward to that and make sure that we will help you through the process. We also encourage library staff and trustees to watch the recording of the recent ADA and accessibility workshop that we hosted last month. The link to that is on Niche Academy, and I will put the link to that hopefully in the chat. My Zoom is being very weird, so I can't access the chat right now, but I'll put a link in if I can. If not, I'll send it out to you otherwise. And we're also planning to have a fundraising workshop within the next few weeks or a few months, probably looking at December or January for that. So just watch the digest and the CE updates for information about that. And so that's all I have, and happy to turn it over to the presenters. Thank you for being here.
Great. So my name is Jenna Lapachinski. I'm a field service rep for the Preservation Trust of Vermont. Myself, Michelle, and Caitlin, we're going to do a brief overview of our three organizations and the way that we typically support historic preservation projects and how we can work with libraries to help you with preliminary planning and then to successfully apply both to our grant programs and to the Department of Libraries program. So I will start by sharing my screen, and then we'll work our way through our presentations, and we will be all set. So here. So can everybody see the presentation? You should just see a nice little PowerPoint, not the presenter view.
Yes, Jenna, we can see that.
Excellent, good. I always worry with technology. So like I said, Jenna Lapachinski, do field service work. Happy to share my contact information at the end, and I can pop it in the chat bar as well. I work for the Preservation Trust of Vermont. We are the statewide historic preservation nonprofit, and our mission is to build community through the revitalization of historic buildings, community gathering places, downtowns, and village centers. We do that in a lot of different ways, and I think our end of year map is always a good snapshot of what our year looks like. And so the map on the left is actually the work that we did in 2021, and we haven't published our map for 2022 yet. It'll come out by the end of the year. But just to give you a rough idea, we worked on about 250 projects in 144 different communities. We hold 86 easements. We made 58 Robert Senserbo Fund grants, which are the preliminary planning grants that we do, and we'll talk a little bit about those. We have 76 active capital grants, and so that's 76 projects that we've funded on historic buildings, many of them on libraries. We helped host the Downtown and Historic Preservation Conference with over 300 attendees. And we had a slate of retreats that we offered in person this year, which was really great. And we served projects in 38 different communities. And so really what we do is work with a lot of different communities on projects that are very, unique to their individual community and their challenges. And in a lot of ways, I mean, libraries are a huge part of what we do because they are, by nature, community gathering places and frequently are located in historic buildings. One of the main ways that we'll work with any historic preservation project or library project is through our field services program. So we have 3 staff people who are here to guide individuals and organizations who are involved in historic preservation projects. And really, if you take nothing else away from today, please reach out. It is our job to provide technical assistance and help you all navigate these these buildings and the challenges you encounter. We're the first point of contact for any of the funding programs that we'll talk about. We are a great way to connect with partners like Caitlin and Michelle and other partners in kind of the preservation and community development world. We're here to help, and we mean that when we say it, and I know Caitlin and Michelle do as well. So please, please, please reach out. We're happy to chat, even if it's a basic question about, you know, how to address a drainage problem, or if it's a site visit and then a 5-year relationship from there. We're really, whatever comes up, we're here for you. And the funding, the thing that people are probably most interested in learning more about. We have the Robert Cincerbo Fund, which is the preliminary planning program. We make capital grants through our partnership with the 1772 Foundation. We make grants in the Northeast Kingdom through our partnership with the Freeman Foundation, grants in Rutland County through our partnership with the Johnson Family Foundation. And we make Bruin Historic Revitalization grants, which are sub-grants from the National Park Service. We've also supported projects through 2 different Northern Border Regional Commission grant programs and the Village Revitalization Initiative. And really it's a long way of saying most of our funding comes from outside sources, and then we're able to sub-grant it to eligible projects. And so really what that means is Preservation Trust of Vermont doesn't have a huge amount of grant money that we have control over, but we do get to make a lot of grants through these other programs. And so there'll be some requirements that come up with them, like being located in the Northeast Kingdom or not being able to fund municipally owned buildings that are requirements that come to us from the original funders. And then we have to kind of work within that system. So this is the one that I think will be really helpful as we talk about preliminary planning with the library projects. The RSF program, or the Robert Cincerbo Fund, is available to help offset the cost of hiring preservation consultants or architects to evaluate the condition of a historic building. The grants can go up to $500, and it supports a wide variety of preliminary planning. We're seeing that planning is costing between $500 and $1,500 for most types of planning. It can be more expensive if you start talking about feasibility studies and construction planning programs. But again, there are other pots of money that you can look at to support that larger type of planning, and PTV can help you find those. Really, this program is looking at connecting projects with the professionals to help provide prioritized repairs, give cost estimates to help you develop a funding strategy and understand whether or not you need to phase your project, what's the highest priority, who do you need to be talking to first. And a really nice thing about this program is that you can apply really as many times as you need to. If you start with a general assessment and there's something about the foundation that needs an engineer to come out, we can help with that. If you need accessibility improvements, we can help with that. If you need help with fundraising, we can help with that. And so it's really an opportunity to both develop a relationship with BTV and the professionals who are working in the field. And many of these folks, you know, donate their time to this program. And we've been really lucky to work with some incredible professionals over the years. Just a small example of things that we work on, you know, I think accessibility planning will be a large part of the conversation. Maintenance planning is really important, so you don't have to deal with those really large construction projects. You can just kind of keep on top of things over time. Window conditions assessments are another one that's really important. We really emphasize the restoration of historic windows as opposed to replacement, and that's a pretty good energy efficiency option as well. And so all of those are things that can be covered through the RSF program. Through our partnership with 1772, we award $10,000 matching grants for exterior repairs to nonprofit owned historic buildings. And I underline that because I know some libraries are municipally owned and those wouldn't typically be eligible for this program. Eligible activities include fire detection, lightning protection, and security systems, exterior restoration, repair to porches, roofs, and windows, exterior repairs and painting. And I should have underlined painting because that's important. A lot of grant programs won't fund painting as a standalone item. This program does. And so that's really important to keep in mind when thinking about who to best to apply to for what type of work. We can fund chimney and masonry repointing and then structural repairs. There will be a letter of interest announcement sometime late in 2022. Letters of interest come in. We invite a pool of applicants to apply with a full application, and then the 1772 Foundation makes decisions usually in April or May, just to give you a sense of what the timeline of that one looks like. Up in the Northeast Kingdom, we make preservation grants in partnership with the Freeman Foundation. And so these are open to nonprofit and municipally owned buildings, specifically Essex County, Orleans County, and Caledonia County. Eligible projects have to have strong community support, either demonstrated through volunteer efforts or fundraising. Grants typically range $10,000 to $50,000. They review proposals on an annual basis, and proposals are submitted through the Preservation Trust of Vermont. So this is a really good one that if you are located in the Northeast Kingdom, that you should reach out to us and we can start that conversation. In Rutland County, through our partnership with the Johnson Family Foundation, we make small grants to preservation projects that provide essential services to communities. Libraries certainly would meet that qualification. The grants typically range from $5,000 to $10,000. Sometimes we can go a little bit higher. Again, they review proposals on an annual basis as well. So again, just be in touch with us and we can kind of talk through what that timeline might look like. We really try and be flexible with this funding. To really meet the needs of specific projects. We've done accessibility, window restoration, storm windows, foundation repairs, exterior repairs. We've helped with boiler replacements. It's really whatever the building needs to be able to better serve the community. And then last but not least, the Paul Brune Revitalization Grant Program. So this is made in partnership with the National Park Service. So it's federal money. It supports the preservation, restoration of buildings and community gathering places that have economic and social significance. We make these grants in communities with fewer than 75,000 people, and the grants typically range from $50,000 to $100,000. We have funded one library through this program, and we're on our 4th year of making these grants. The important thing here is that grants are made in a way to increase economic vitality. And so whatever we're funding needs to help increase either economic or social activity. And so continuing to offer the same programs wouldn't necessarily be a competitive grant application. The Haskell Library really worked well because in addition to being a library, it houses the Opera House on the 2nd floor. And this is the cultural and economic hub of this community. And it really serves residents both in Vermont and across the border as well. And so this was a great project and a great fit for that program. And we just finished up our preservation retreats for 2022, but we'll be back in 2023. We host them up in Grand Isle throughout the summer, and we cover a wide variety of topics, but we do have one specifically for libraries, nonprofit owned and public buildings, and libraries usually make up a good part of that group. And then you can see churches, fundraising, community development, accessibility. We really try and represent a wide variety of topics and then group projects together so people who are able to help each other solve problems and then meet with the technical assistance providers that are best suited for their projects. So that's kind of a broad overview of what Preservation Trust of Vermont does and the type of work that we can fund. And I will pass it off to Caitlin, and she can tell you about the Division for Historic Preservation.
Thanks, Jenna. We did have one question come in on the chat while you were talking, and I was hoping you could maybe just answer that really quickly before I jump in. And it was about nonprofit friends groups applying on behalf of the municipal library. I know that's a situation that's probably fairly common actually around the state.
So for the Brune Revitalization Grant, municipalities would be an eligible entity. That's open both to municipally owned buildings and nonprofit owned buildings. We have had instances where I think friends groups apply on behalf of municipally owned buildings. The town government would need to be on board with the application and they would need to sign off on any of the requirements. So certainly a possibility.
I think this was more a reference to the 1772 Foundation. Have you had any like that?
We had in the first year, the foundation seems to be less open to that conversation as we kind of move further into the grant making. I would say that if the library is municipally owned, but the Friends Group is responsible for the care of the building and they could make a good case for it, we could certainly ask them about it. But
Yeah,
in
so it
all
sounds like the
likelihood,
best thing is to just get in touch with you.
yeah, it is.
Yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. And Jenna, somebody's asking for your email address, so if you could just put that in the chat.
Yep, I'll put my contact information in the chat.
Perfect, thanks. Thank you. So I am now going to attempt to share my screen, and hopefully this will work. Hopefully you can all see that now. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caitlin Corkins. I'm the Tax Credit and Grants Coordinator at the Division for Historic Preservation. So I have the best job at the division because I get to administer our grant programs. And I get to work with all of you wonderful folks on preserving your wonderful historic community buildings. I'm just going to quickly run through these slides, the very top level information about this program. But as Jenna mentioned at the beginning of her presentation, please, please, please feel free to call me anytime. The sooner the better when you're thinking about a project. My job is to help people access this program. And so I want to have conversations with folks early on to make sure that you are applying for the right thing and to help you be successful. So the state's Historic Preservation Grant Program was founded in 1986. And since that time, we've awarded over $6 million in grants for over 600 historic building projects. The funding for this program comes from the capital bill through the legislature. So every biennium, we have to go back and ask for funding. Luckily, this program has proved to be really popular and has been funded consistently since 1986, and with small increases over the years. So we're really thrilled by that. The maximum grant available through this program is $20,000, and it is a matching grant, so one-to-one matching grant. The grants are competitively awarded annually by the Vermont Advisory Council for Historic Preservation. So they're the body that reviews applications and makes funding decisions. Another important thing to know up front, this is a reimbursement grant. That means that you apply for the grant. If you're successfully awarded the grant, you would do your project and then pay the bills. And then after that, we would reimburse you for the grant. So you do need to have a way to, in an interim kind of basis, pay for the project up front. Grants are available for municipalities and nonprofit organizations. So, everyone on this call is going to be an eligible applicant in that sense. Buildings must also be listed or eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. Many of our libraries are already listed, especially listed as contributing resources in a downtown or a village National Register district. However, if you're unsure, if you want to check to make sure that you would be eligible, meet this eligibility requirement, please don't hesitate to reach out to me and I'm happy to look that up. If for some reason your library isn't already listed, we're also happy to do what's called a determination of eligibility. It's not an actual listing, but basically would just evaluate it to say that yes, it could be listed. And that would be all that would be needed to qualify for this grant program. As I mentioned, this is a matching grant program. We ask that the match for the grant be in hand at the time of application. This doesn't mean that you need to have cash in a bank, although that of course would work as match. You could also have a match that was through pledges from folks that had promised to help fund the project if you're awarded a grant, borrowing from a line of credit with a bank or an endowment fund that you have access to. Basically, you need to have access to the matching funds at the time of application in some form or other. Another important thing to know, this is a historic preservation grant, so probably not surprising, but any work funded through this program must meet the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So these are the preservation standards that we use across all of the programs that we administer at the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation. It's basically a set of rules that help guide work to ensure that historic resources are treated thoughtfully, that any changes that are made are done sensitively so as not to impact the historic character of the building. And this is another thing that is not necessarily obvious, especially if you're not in this world all the time. So again, I always encourage folks before they start a project and before they get too far along, even in planning and doing architectural drawings, for example, to reach out to me and have a conversation about what the project is so that we can head off any potential conflicts with the Secretary of the Interior standards and make sure that you are eligible for the grant program. So projects that we fund through this program are really focused on the repair of the historic building fabric. That could include roof repair or replacement, structural repairs, foundation and drainage work, window restoration, door repair, masonry work, siding repair. These could be things that kind of fall into one of three categories. Stabilization and immediate need would be something like our roof is leaking, we need to fix it. That's really critical to do it right away. Necessary repairs and corrective maintenance. So things like reglazing historic windows to make sure that don't deteriorate to the point where they must be replaced. And we also fund enhancement projects, we call them. So reconstruction or restoration of missing historic elements. And this could be, for example, if the library had a porch on it at one point that was removed, and you wanted to restore that element to the building. The key thing to know there is that any kind of restoration project would have to be based on documentation. So either drawings or photographs showing that historic element and not based on guesswork or conjecture. Projects we do not fund. So this is equally important to take note of course. We do not fund improvements to historic buildings. So things like adding insulation, mechanical systems, accessibility improvements. These are, of course, all things that we know historic buildings need, and we're not saying you can't have them, just that this particular grant program can't fund that type of work. As Jenna had mentioned with the 1772 Foundation and the painting, it's really great that that program offers that. It is not something that we generally fund through our grant program. It's considered to be more of maintenance and therefore not really a capital project. I would say the exception there, and please by all means, let's have a conversation about your specific particulars. But for example, if we're funding with window restoration work, yes, painting can be part of that. And in fact, it's a crucial, important part of the window restoration project. So it's not that we don't fund painting at all, but more that if it's just basic scraping and painting of the exterior, that's more maintenance kind of thing. Just a few tips really quick in terms of our program that are really crucial to providing a successful application. Photographs are really, 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 really important. I can't state that enough. We want to see your existing building from all sides. We want to see its setting, but we also want to see close-up details of the issues that you're trying to address with the grant project. You know, a lot of folks come to us for roof repair or replacement, and taking pictures of roofs can sometimes be a challenge in terms of access. So that's something you want to think about ahead of time to find ways to get the photos you need to demonstrate your need. We also ask that people submit at least one estimate from a qualified contractor who has experience working on historic buildings. We don't actually have, you know, a list of people you must select from. It's more that we want to have a demonstration that the person doing the project has some experience working on historic buildings. And if you're awarded a grant, we would work with you to make sure that was the case. This has been one of the biggest challenges, I would say, in the last couple of years, particularly the last year of administering this grant program. It's really hard to find contractors. They're really busy, and the good ones are already booking into, you know, 2023. So this is again something you want to start working on early on. Don't wait until a month before the grant deadline to start reaching out to contractors. You just won't be able to get someone to come out and look at your building and give you a written estimate in time. We do want estimates that are fairly recent, usually within a year of the application deadline. This is just because pricing changes, and we all know inflation has gone a little crazy here. So even more necessary now than maybe in past years to make sure you're working with current numbers in terms of your estimates. And I also want to just make a plug for the Robertson-Serbo Fund that Jenna mentioned. Building assessments are often a fantastic way to sort of start the process. It will really give you a sense of the prioritized list of all of the work that you need to do so that you can demonstrate to funders like the Advisory Council for Historic Preservation that you've done your homework, that you're really doing things in a logical way, and picking projects that make sense to tackle first. And then last but not least, the program timeline. So grants are announced each year during the late summer, usually early August, with an annual application deadline of October. We then award grants in December, usually around Christmas time. And once you're awarded a grant, you have 2 years from the date of award to complete your project. So basically 2 full building seasons. This allows for some flexibility in terms of contractor schedules, of course, Vermont weather, which is always unpredictable, as well as maybe doing a little additional fundraising if you need to gather the funds you need to do the project up, before getting reimbursed upfront. So with that, I'm going to close out of this and stop.
Caitlin,
yeah.
There was a question in the chat bar about ADA, and maybe after Michele finishes, we can go back and talk about that. But there was a question about layering grant funds and, can using one grant program to match another grant program. And so I think you and Michele should, can talk about how the state works. I know PTV grant funds have frequently been used to match, as match for the DHP application, and vice versa. DHP works fine for 1772 in our programs.
Yeah, I would say the general guidance for people to know is that state grants usually can't match other state grants, state money and state money together. However, state grants could match a federal grant or a private foundation grant. So there may be an opportunity to layer multiple grants in a project. But you do want to ask that question. It's going to depend on the specific program, of course. I know for the Historic Preservation Grant Program, we're happy to allow folks to use match from federal grants or private foundation grants, but not other state grants. And Michele, I'm sure, can also speak to that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Michele.
All right. Thank you, Caitlin. Let me just get my screen shared here. All right. Hopefully, can you all see the presentation screen there?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let me up. So I've got to do one quick thing here. Sorry about this. I'm just going to move some notes around here. Okay. Go back to this. So my name is Michele Bailey. I'm the Senior Program Manager and the Accessibility Coordinator at the Vermont Arts Council. And at the Vermont Arts Council, our mission is to advance the arts and creativity in communities across Vermont. And we have a number of grant programs, but this one in particular, the Cultural Facilities Grants, is one that we feel is really critical to helping to advance the health and vitality of Vermont communities, because we know these cultural institutions are extremely critical to the health of all our great Vermont communities. So the Cultural Facilities Grant is provides critical funds to nonprofit organizations and municipalities to enhance, create, or expand the capacity of an existing facility. That's important to know. We don't do new construction, an existing facility to provide cultural activities to the public. So basically helping to improve the usability of these buildings for community cultural programming. It is one of the state's Building Communities grants. So the state, through the capital budget, funds about 7 different grant programs. One of them being cultural facilities, the program that Caitlin runs, historic preservation grants, barn grants, and other things are all part of this capital budget funding source. And the important thing to know there is just that because they're all funded by the capital budget, the legislature does have some rules about receiving more than one of these in a fiscal year. So if you are thinking of applying to the cultural facilities grant and the historic preservation grant program that Caitlin runs, I would encourage you to call or contact one of us just to be sure that you don't double dip in the same fiscal year. You can stagger them and get them in different fiscal years, but they just don't want you to receive more than one in a fiscal year so that they can spread the money out across different projects throughout the state. So who's eligible? You have to have an existing facility that is at least 10 years old. It has to be physically located in Vermont. It needs to be owned by a Vermont nonprofit or a municipality, and the applicant should be the building owner, although sometimes in the case of libraries or other town buildings, there may be another group like a nonprofit who is actually running and maintaining a building that is technically owned by the town. In that case, I would just say reach out to me because the applicant can generally come from either entity. It's just a matter of getting a nice letter of support from the actual owner or the other, if it's the town that owns it, but the library is doing the maintenance, just getting, or the, facilities work, that you get a letter of support in there to match it and to make sure everybody's all on board that you're applying for the grant. And then because this is a cultural facilities grant program, we want to see evidence of cultural programming and activities happening for the general public. Libraries, we have had a lot of libraries apply over the years, and there's most regularly not a problem at all. Libraries are such a vibrant and important part of community that you tend to be doing a lot of these community cultural activities. And by that, I mean, thinking about what do you have, what community spaces are there, what activities above and beyond the checking in and out of books are you providing? Are you doing storytelling? Are you doing film series? Are you doing performances? Or you have exhibits, or all kinds of possible things. So just keep that in mind. Again, another piece of the eligibility is that you can't have received a cultural facilities grant in our last fiscal year or in FY22 if the grant was greater than $15,000. And if you have any questions about any of that, if you received a recent cultural facilities grant and you're wondering if you're eligible again, I would just suggest you reach out to me and we can talk about it and I can let you know. And then any work that we fund has to take place between September of 2023 and August 30th of 2024. That is if you apply next spring when we have our next deadline coming up. And again, like Caitlin mentioned, I always encourage and strongly encourage actually that you reach out to me and just have a conversation about what you want to apply for, just so that I can make sure that what you're applying for is eligible, and also I help you to focus your application or put together the strongest possible proposal that you can. Tentatively right now, we're looking at May 1st of 2023 for the next round of deadlines, with workshops in February and March. We do grant seeker workshops similar to what I'm doing now. I'm doing a really rough and quick brush through of all of the program information, but we'll go a little deeper in those grant seeker workshops. And then we typically notify around the end of August for any work that starts September 1st. And then we do have an online granting system that we ask you to submit your grants through that system. Grant amounts range from $1,000 to $30,000, and they must be matched 1-to-1. But up to 50% of that match can be from well-documented and in-kind sources. So either a local lumberyard maybe is donating materials to you, or a local electrician is donating his or her labor. So there's ways that you can get that to be part of the match as well. It is a reimbursement program, so any funds awarded wouldn't be granted out to you and given to you until after the project is completed, which you would need to submit a final report after the work is done and send us receipts and invoices and photos of the completed work. And as Caitlin mentioned too, we can't have grant funds from other state sources matching this grant as another state source. So that's just a good rule of thumb. But I'm again happy to talk with you about any kind of questions you might have about that. So what do we fund through this program? We kind of fund all the things that I mentioned about making spaces more usable to the public. So accessibility improvements, features such as elevators, lifts, ramps, bathrooms, assistive listening systems, improvements that address comfort, such as upgrades to fixed seating or heating and air conditioning. Life safety systems, things like fire safety, sprinkler systems, fire escapes, and other code improvements like electrical upgrades. Fixed equipment, such as theatrical lighting and sound system upgrades, as well as permanent displays and exhibit cases. If you do have regular displays or exhibits in your facility, whatever system you are building shouldn't be kind of off the shelf that you get at the local hardware store, but really something that's being custom built for your situation. Next, we also do collections care projects, although these improvements really have to do more with the environmental improvements like humidity controls, etc. Also just storage systems and lighting, those are all eligible. It's not about the repair or conservation of the collection itself. That's a different type of project, not really considered capital in this context, so we wouldn't do that. But anything environmental like that we could support. And then hazard mitigation, such as floodgates, rain gutters, again, sprinkler systems I mentioned, those kinds of things are also eligible through our program. I do want to mention that we do things that we don't fund, and that includes new construction. If you're building a whole new building or you're making an addition to your library, that would not be eligible unless there is some kind of accessibility component to that. So let's say that your addition is just building a shaft that you need to put an elevator up to your second floor because there's not space within the footprint of the library itself. Something like that would be eligible, or a ramp, those kinds of things could be possibly eligible. So just let me know, reach out to me. We also can't fund things like appliances or movable furniture or rugs, or any of the funds that are around planning, architectural drawings, overhead, that kind of a thing, or multi-year projects. And generally, we don't do routine maintenance type things either. So that's important to keep in mind. So I'm going to just run through some of these slides I use in my full grant seeker workshop. I'm going to just skim through them quickly, but the criteria, 30% of it, as I mentioned, because this is cultural facilities, we want to hear about your cultural programming, or if you're not currently doing it, what could happen if you made this, if this grant were awarded and you put heat in the building, say, maybe you could do programs throughout the winter kind of thing. So, you know, what could happen? And also the remaining 70% are around criteria related to the building, the needs of the building, the project management, the budget, all those things. So we'll continue quickly. And then the application itself, there are narrative questions that we ask you to address. We want organization information, who are the key people involved. And then the project budget, I just want to highlight that really quickly because you may be doing a capital campaign or some kind of larger project in your building. And you might have, let's say, a $400,000 capital campaign you're working on, but maybe you're applying to us to put in a new heating system. So we don't want to have the whole capital budget. We want to have you put together the budget and the costs for putting that heating system in. So just really focus in on what the funding is supporting. So just to keep it narrow and focused in that way. We asked for photos, evidence of cultural activities, estimates. I'll pause there and emphasize that again because estimates have been taking a long time to get. So if we're having a spring deadline, it will be good to start this winter, to get some current estimates. We do require 2 written estimates for each component. So if you're, for example, doing 2 things like putting insulation in, and while you have your walls and everything torn apart to put new insulation in, you might want to upgrade your electrical wiring as well. If you're getting 2 estimates from 2 different vendors, we need 2 estimates for the insulation and 2 estimates for the electrical upgrades. So not 1 of each. So again, I'll be doing more detailed grant seeker workshops when we get into the spring a little bit more, but that's kind of the overview of that. As I mentioned, photos, these are just some other detailed photos. We want 1 image of the whole building, and then those sad pictures of the things that are going wrong in your facility that you want help with, the programming, estimates I mentioned, support materials, like letters of support, etc. The one thing I did want to mention, if you are doing an accessibility project, we do have some specific requirements around that. We want you to complete what's called the ADA accessibility checklist for existing facilities. This one is a self-assessment tool that you can walk around your building, take some measurements. If you're applying, it is a pretty long and thick document, and so it covers your entire building for those physical assessments. But if you're applying for a new bathroom, say, just fill out the pages related to the bathroom. Or if you're putting in a new elevator and you go to the pages in this document that ask you about your existing elevator, it may only take you 5 minutes to answer those questions, because if there's no elevator in the building, there's nothing currently in place to measure. So just say, no, we don't have an elevator, or NA, not applicable. So just some things like that. We also want to have some drawings, so floor plans, so that we can understand your path of travel, and the dimensions are really helpful for our review panel to look at. If the dimensions aren't in the document, it's very difficult for them to tell if this is a compliant renovation that you're proposing. So we do have folks who are knowledgeable in ADA compliance looking at these drawings. So it's really important to have those dimensions included. In addition to the floor plans, it also means we would love to have and need to have some elevation drawings. So this is an example of a bathroom where we can see the heights of the grab bars and the lengths of the grab bars and the heights of your, towel dispensers and all those things. So that's really important for us to understand that you and your project architect and other folks understand the needs of the ADA requirements. So anyway, I'm almost done here. There will be some additional tools on our website too, an application preview, so you can look at all those narrative questions, tips on building a budget. There'll be a checklist, all those kinds of things when we get there. The information from last year's grant guidelines and application preview are online now, so you can start looking at that. We'll be posting new stuff in the winter, probably around January, February, but you can start looking at those things now. They won't shift super greatly. And then finally, just like I said, we want to have we have an online application that we want you to use. If you've not previously used that system, when we do open it up, you'll want to go in and create an account in there if you've not created one there in the past. It sometimes takes a couple of days for the account to get set up, and I mention that now early because if there are folks that wait till the last minute to start this, it can take a couple of business days for our staff to get the account open for you and sent. So just do it early as soon as you can this winter, I would suggest. And then the other thing is we do require something called a unique employer identification number. That doesn't take long to take. You can go onto the cultural facilities website now and get your ID number. Probably many of you already have them, but just wanted to mention that there is a little video on there and information about how to get one set up. It's free, so if you get somewhere where people are trying to charge you for something, it may be that you've somehow linked into an incorrect site where someone's trying to scam you. So don't get sucked into paying for something. This should be just a free number to get. So that is all for me right now. And I can take any questions that you might have had for me.
Michelle, there was a question, I think specifically about the Cultural Facilities Grant Program. Can you clarify if a friends group wanted to apply for a municipally owned library, what they would need to do?
Yes, that has happened quite a bit. You can apply as a friends group if you'd like, but I would suggest having a letter of support from the town or, whoever that legal owner of the building is included in your letter, saying they are in support of your work and they know that you're applying for it and what you're planning to do. That's all that we're really looking for there. So.
And there was a question in the chat bar, and I think you and Caitlin can tackle this together in terms of can an organization get grants from the state for the same project? Like they understand it can't be used as match, but can they apply for the same project? And so I think teasing out what is eligible for each of your programs is important.
Yeah, so I think it really depends on how the project is defined, right? Because Michele and I, the programs that we run actually tend to be wonderful complements to each other in that we don't really fund the same type of work. The historic preservation grant funding is really focused on the main components of the historic building, the roof, the structure, the foundation. Whereas Michele's program, as she mentioned, is about the improvements that usability of the building. So things like heating systems and accessibility. So if you have a large project that includes multiple things, and some of those are, the roof structure kind of thing, and some of them are the heating system, accessibility, electrical improvements, then yeah, over the course of a couple of years, you could apply to both programs. If you waited so that they were in different fiscal years. But if you're looking for a grant for your roof project, you're going to want to come to me and not to Michele. That's not the type of thing that is funded through that program. And on the opposite side, if you're trying to find work to fund a new heating system, you're going to want to go to Michele and not me, because historic preservation grants don't fund heating systems. So does that kind of help, hopefully?
Yeah, I think that defining the project, if you came to us to do an electrical upgrade, say that's your project. It can be the same building. It would just have to be in a different fiscal year, and you define your project as the electrical work versus, maybe a roof or something that Caitlin would be funding. So,
and Michele and I work closely together. We do fund projects on the same building. So we're often in communication. I will direct people to Michele when it's a project that's not a good fit for my grant, and vice versa. I see that there's a question about ensuring that you're coordinating efforts with all the resources out there. That's such a great question. I think we can all agree that from our perspective, the best thing to do is to reach out to one of us early on. We can help you direct you to the right funding source. If it's a really big project that has multiple components, we're happy to even set up potential virtual or physical site visits to kind of pull several funders together to help you look at what different funding sources could fund different components of a larger project, and how to sort of build your timeline for when to apply for which grant source.
Yeah, I think if you reach out to any of us, we could help guide you in any of that, because it can be a little overwhelming and confusing. So please, you're welcome to call us and we'll help you. And if we're not the right person, most of us probably know who to send you to. So
yeah. And we want you to be successful. We want you to spend your time in the best way possible. And so applying to Caitlin for something that isn't eligible or is a better fit for Michele's program, we want to help you figure that out early. There was a question about, the time commitment for grantees in terms of an application process or grant management. And so, again, starting with clear conversations early on will help with that. Do you either of you have any thoughts in terms of time commitments for your grants in terms of application and management? And then I can speak a little bit about PTVs.
In terms of how much time people should set aside, is that the question?
I think it sounds like a time commitment that you see from grantees in the application process or grant management. So how long does it take to put the application together, and then how demanding are kind of the requirements as you manage the grant?
Being on this side, I can't really say for sure. The application itself is meant to be something that you don't have to be a grant writer to fill it out. So it shouldn't take you weeks and weeks. I think the components that you need to start working on up front, as Michele and I had already mentioned, are the estimates, and then things like photographs. But then the actual form itself, it shouldn't take you more than a couple of days to put it together. That doesn't mean you should wait until 2 days before the deadline to start. You really want to get started sooner rather than later. But it's not, meant to be something that's going to take you a month to put together. And then in terms of the administration, this is a state program. So in terms of the requirements and administration going through the process, it's again not meant to be really burdensome. There are some federal grant funds out there that require quite a lot of administration. But this is not meant to be something you're going to be devoting more than maybe a couple hours a week to.
I would also just add to what Caitlin says, and the applications themselves aren't necessarily that difficult if you have the homework done ahead of time in terms of, for example, one of the questions in the cultural facilities grants is, what are the top 5 priorities for the needs of your building? And that's an important question to answer, because if you're applying to put in a new heating system, continuing with that example, but yet there's a gaping hole in the roof, the committee may not feel like that's a wise time to invest in a heating system for the state. So, that's why, again, working with PTV and that RSF grant might provide you with that general building assessment so you can prioritize what are those needs and where do we really need to focus. So the prep work ahead of time, I think, is where probably the majority of the work is, because if you get that priority list figured out and you know what you need to do first, then you getting your estimates and then just kind of documenting with the photos and maybe a letter or 2 of support. Those things can take a little bit of time, but if you work on those up front, you can start doing those things now. And be ready to go. I'm not sure what the other library funding will have for requirements, but at least for the programs we're talking about today, between Caitlin and I, you should be pretty good to speak to, your community and the programs you offer and things like that. So.
And I would echo most of that. I would say most of our foundation grant programs, the application process is fairly easy, and we are certainly here to help you navigate that, answer questions. If you need help with that preliminary planning before we get to the grant applications, we can help there too. I would say that the one that is more challenging is the Bruin Grant Program, and that's because it is federal money that is subgranted through the Preservation Trust, but we do have a staff person who's there to help answer questions, help you navigate the environmental reviews. We build money into the administrative part of our budget to be able to do that. So I would say, you know, you can lean on us to help you answer those questions, but we really try and make these programs as user-friendly as possible. There was, Caitlin and Michelle, a question. Can more than one institute in a town apply for a cultural facilities grant? Oh, Michelle, if one is a municipal building like the library and one is a nonprofit not associated with the library.
Yes, absolutely. We don't have town or geographic criteria necessarily. So if you have a theater in the town and the library, you both have needs and you're both submitting applications, that's fine. We don't have any restrictions in that way. So yes.
There was a question about can federal ARPA funds through the towns be used for matching funds with these grants? And I would say yes, they
Yes.
certainly would be eligible matching funds for PTV grants. And
Yes.
Likewise.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the really nice things about the ARPA funding is it's very flexible.
We do have, if we're all set on questions for now, and if anyone has a question, you can use the reactions button to raise your hand and you'll bump up on the screen, or you can continue to use the chat bar. That's been working pretty well since we have multiple eyes watching it. We do have a kind of a grants presentation as well, so we can move on to that, and that may spur some additional questions.
Yeah, so this next set of slides is really just general tips for successful grant writing. And so I'm going to attempt to share my screen once again. All right, and hopefully that worked. Michelle and I are going to tag team on this. So again, these are not necessarily specific to either of our grant programs, more just general guidance on grant writing. You know, as libraries are working with this ARPA funding, there may be other sources that we haven't covered here in detail today that you may be wanting to apply for. And so the idea here is just, these are some things to keep in mind, regardless of what grant you're applying for. And, you know, some of this will seem a little bit repetitive, things we've already talked about, but I think it's worth going through. So before you apply for any grant, you want to have a good sense of what your needs are. You know, what is the scope of the project? This means you want to have a pretty good idea of what the issues are that need to be resolved and how they should be prioritized in a logical way. And you want to research the opportunities. That means reaching out to different funders and having a conversation with them to see if the project you're trying to fund is a good fit. I can't speak for every grant program out there, but I would say generally speaking, funders really want you to reach out and have a short conversation so that they can say, yes, this is a good project, please apply, or no, this isn't really the type of thing we fund through this program, but we could do this, this, or this. That 5-minute conversation could potentially save you a lot of time and effort. There's nothing more frustrating as a funder than getting an application that somebody's worked really hard on and it's not eligible. And you know, like from the get-go that it's not going to be funded.
Okay, before you apply, some of our grants, not mine, meaning cultural facilities, but some grants out there, specifically, I think federal funding and some other sources, there may be requirements around public engagement that require you to have community meetings or public hearings community surveys, those kinds of things. It's really important that you get those done in coordination with whatever the grant requirements are for that program. Speak to those funders, find out the timing of those things. You may need to have some documentation of that public input process. So that's just kind of a general tip out there. Like I said, culture facilities, we don't require that kind of documentation. It's great if you've done that kind of work, but it's not a requirement of our grant program. So just wanted to generally mention that because many of you are dealing with federal and state and other funds that might have these kinds of public input and community engagement requirements.
Hey, Jen, I didn't know if you wanted to jump in here on this public engagement piece, because I know that's something that PTV works with a lot of communities on.
Yeah, absolutely. And we do a lot of work around community engagement, not necessarily as a requirement that goes with federal funding, but just as an important part of the project process. That there's nothing worse than having a community group invest a lot of time in plans and a project and then bring it to the community and have the community just provide a lot of negative feedback. And so we always recommend that you engage the community through every phase, that you engage those people who may be naysayers, whether it's at town meeting or at the transfer station. Like, you want to hear people's feedback on the project because sometimes people have genuine concerns and it provides you an opportunity to improve your project. Or sometimes people just want to be listened to. Sometimes they just want to be able to air their grievances, and providing them that space and doing it in a very intentional manner will hopefully help with a smoother project process. And a lot of grant applications are going to ask you about community support, and the way you build community support is by involving them in your project. And so when you think about who is going to benefit from these improvements, whether it's, providing better access to your library, increasing programming, having longer hours, those are all things that you can figure out as you're working through this community engagement process. And so I know groups are always excited once a plan is semi in place to start applying for grants, but really make sure that you're bringing the community along in that process.
Yeah, and it's also, if you're looking to raise funds locally, it's good to build it from the point of view of a lot of community excitement. And, if you're having to do a local fundraising effort, getting people excited about your project, your passion for this project will likely be enthusiastic and what's the word, contagious to others if you are excited about it. So, there's that aspect as well.
And that's a really good point, Michelle, that I feel like we've been touching on but haven't specifically said. Almost all of the grant programs will require a match. And so whether you have that in hand or whether you need to do some community fundraising, we say that most projects are going to be funded 70% from community fundraising and 30% through grants. I think that equation has shifted a little bit with the influx of money, both through ARPA and through other programs. But there's always going to be a need for community funding, and so it's really important to have those conversations early. And we can help with that, both as technical assistance providers and connecting you with those resources.
Right. So the next tip, make sure you read the guidelines thoroughly. Sometimes the guidelines are longer than the application, and we're all busy people, and reading all through all of that stuff can be burdensome sometimes. But I think it's so important because it'll really set you up, again, to know that you're applying for the right thing. And that you're gathering the pieces of information that you need ahead of time, so that when you actually sit down to start writing the application itself, you'll have everything you need to do that. Another thing that I want to just touch on is regulatory processes. This is not a particularly fun topic, obviously. But when you're dealing with public money, there usually are some regulatory requirements that you need to meet. And what those are will depend on the type of funding that's involved. I talked about that a little bit with my grant program, and work needing to meet preservation standards if it's funded through the Historic Preservation Grant Program. But the fact is that really any kind of public funding that involves a historic building is going to have at least a check-in with our office in terms of meeting historic preservation requirements. That's true for both state grant programs and federal grant programs. So my best advice with dealing with regulatory requirements is to reach out early so that we can help lay out the steps for you that that you're going to have to meet. We don't want you to get bogged down halfway through a process and have to circle back and start the regulatory process. So getting that going early on. It's not clear to me with the ARPA funding that's coming through for libraries, exactly what kind of regulatory process will be attached to those funds. I get the sense that maybe it will be less than some kind of other more typical and ongoing federal grant programs. But there's sure to be something involved because it is federal money. So you just want to be aware of that up front.
Great. So we've touched on this a lot already, but just make sure you talk to the staff of the program that you're applying for. Our job is to help you put together the strongest application possible. So reach out. We want to help out if we can. We're here to support you. And then it's often important to know about the review process for each of these programs. Who's reviewing the proposals? Is there a board? Are there staff? Are there outside reviewers or panelists who are reviewing those? Who's on that review panel? So just having an understanding of each program can often help you to put together a stronger proposal when you know who your audience is.
So I would like to think that the grant writing process shouldn't be left to one person. I think it should be more, when you're talking about a nonprofit organization, a municipality, this should be more of a team sport, and taking from the strengths of the various people that you have involved in your organization. There may be somebody that's particularly skilled at writing narratives. They just really have a way with words. Always good to have somebody who's a good proofreader with that red pen to be involved and look through, final drafts before things get submitted. Is there somebody that's particularly good at taking photographs? Somebody who has a nice eye for photos, somebody that's maybe not afraid to climb up into the tower to get those pictures you need of the roof. Or maybe even someone that has a drone that could get some aerial shots for you. So trying to build a team of folks together to help put together the application, it'll just lessen the burden for any one person. And again, you can really take advantage of the different strengths of various people that you have involved. Start your application well before the deadline. I know I've already said this, and I just want to hammer home that point. The last few days before our grant deadlines we're always really busy handling lots of last minute calls and inquiries. And I've talked to people who've been, maybe talking with me for months, but they didn't really sit down to do the application until a couple days before the deadline. And now they realize, oh, I don't have this piece of information that you're asking for. So give yourself time to hunt down all of those various pieces of information, so that it's not a last minute, shuffle, trying to find people on vacation to respond, or, trying to get that contractor to show up and write you something up really, really quick.
Great. Yeah. And following on that, it's important not to assume that the reader knows about your organization or you. They present the information up front so that they don't have to guess or dig around, or, I've had some panelists who get a little, you have to remember they might be reviewing your grant late at night, and they may be weary. And if they don't know who your organization is or anything about your community or your facility, then they have to go to your website or try to dig around. It's just not going to help them. So you want to try to make their job as easy as possible by providing a nice, concise description of your organization or however it's asked in the application. But just don't assume that the panelists know who you and your organization are. And then again, being concise. I've seen both things where, someone might write a 1-sentence answer and there's really not enough elaboration on what they're asking for. But then the opposite, where there's 6 paragraphs about something that really could be said in 2, is really hard for the panel to read through. It's hard to understand sometimes. So just making sure that you're not being long-winded. And then again, have someone proofread your proposal that's not familiar with the organization, who can help you to clarify and tighten up those proposals. So.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Michelle. Somebody who hasn't been involved in the application can be a really great sounding board for whether or not what you've put together makes sense. If they don't understand what you're asking for, then the grant panel isn't going to either. So that's a really great way to sort of test that. So make sure you follow the instructions and tailor your responses to a particular grant. I know it's really tempting to do a lot of cut and paste when you're maybe applying for multiple grants. And in some cases, people are going to be asking for the same kinds of general information, and you probably can do some of that cutting and pasting. But you also really want to tailor your responses to the particular grant that you're going for, and use language that will catch the eye of the particular grant funder that you're applying to. Michelle kind of touched on this earlier, but different granting funders have different priorities, and so you want to speak to them. You want to know your audience. You want to speak to them and make sure that you're presenting the project in a way that would be compelling and show that you are meeting their goals and priorities with their funding. It's perfectly fine and really encouraged to ask questions if anything is unclear. Just like Michelle said with before, where you shouldn't assume that grant panel knows anything about your organization. We also are in this all the time. And so sometimes what makes perfect sense and is very clear to us might not be clear to you as a first time, grant applicant. So please reach out if you're unclear about what we're asking for, what any funder is asking for, what information is being asked to provide, what format, all of that kind of stuff. And make sure to include any attachments that are required with your application, and follow the formatting instructions. I get a lot of questions every year about how to submit photos for our application. And there are very clear instructions that are provided in our application materials. I will admit, we're a little old school. We're still asking for flash drives with JPEG photos to be submitted through the US Postal Service. There's a reason for that. And so we're asking for it that way. That's the way we want it to show up. Providing materials in a format that is other than what people are asking for is not a good first impression on your potential funder. You want to really follow the instructions. And if you have questions, you feel like, I don't know how to comply with this formatting request or something, that's where please do reach out and get clarity on that before you submit your application.
So if one of the suggested or required attachments to your application is a letter of support, it's really important to reach out to those supporters early to give them plenty of time. I've been called a number of times, or had people reach out to me for various reasons and say, oh, I need it in 2 days, or I need it tomorrow. Everybody is really busy. So anything you can do to make it easier is going to just improve your application. So if it's due, if you can, the more time you can give someone to write a letter of support, the better. And you may even check with them if they want you to go ahead and draft a copy of a letter and send it to them. It may save them oodles of time. It may help you to help them understand what you're wanting them to say. Sometimes it's a little hard to know what, if you're writing a letter of support, what do you want me to focus on for this application? What is the panel or the grant funder looking for? So if you can draft the letter for them, that's great too. So just keeping that in mind. Again, people are busy, so as are you. So the more time you can give yourself and those folks, the better.
Okay, so this may seem really obvious when it comes to budgets. Check your math. I'm not a math person, so this is something that I know I would really want to have double checked for me before I submit anything. You want to show the funder that you are on top of things, that you've done your homework. And part of the way that you do that is providing a really legible budget. Every single grant program you apply to is going to ask for some kind of budget, right? So it's really important that you're putting things in the format that they're asking, providing the numbers that they're asking for in the format they're asking for. I know Michele spoke to the fact that, with cultural facilities, they're not looking for your entire budget. They're just looking for the budget for the particular project that you're seeking grant funding for. Other grants may want to see more of that holistic budget. So knowing what people are looking for and what the format is, and making sure that you follow that is really important.
Great. And as we've mentioned, for historic preservation and cultural facilities grants, we really need photographs, and those images are super helpful in demonstrating the need to your panel. I can't tell you how much a difference those pictures make. The narrative is important, all those other things are important, but those pictures really hit it home to what's going on in your building and what the needs are. So make sure you follow those directions and submit those photos, and then make sure your application is complete. Some folks have checklists, but if you're just going through the application and they don't offer one, make your own kind of checklist to make sure that that you have answered all the questions. Are all the support materials there that you need to be uploaded or to mailed in? And then follow the requirements of those work samples, as Caitlin mentioned before. So,
and this is the last slide. Just a word of encouragement. Grant writing can be really frustrating at times. Grants are competitive, and as a funder, I know every year there are really good projects with good applications that we receive, and we unfortunately just don't have enough funding to fund them all. So don't get discouraged if you're not successful the first time. Don't take it personally. It's not about them not liking, whoever's reviewing the application's not liking your project or your building. They have to make really tough choices, and so it's you should just try and look at it as a way to learn. Not all grant programs will do this, but certainly for my program, and I'm pretty sure for Michele as well. Please call us if you're not successful. We can provide you with feedback. Sometimes very specifically from board meetings where your application may have been discussed, but also just generally from our working with organizations over the years, knowing what's been successful in the past, what hasn't been successful. And we're happy to provide you with that feedback to make improvements and set you up for success.
And for our program, even if you do get the grant, even, we encourage you, or I'm happy to give you feedback about what was good, what you did well, what were your strengths, weaknesses for that proposal. It may have been funded, but if you just barely kind of made it under the wire, it might be good to know that for future applications and what you could do better to improve. So either way, whether you receive funding or not, we're happy to provide feedback to you.
So with that,
yeah, I think that's it for
our
our.
Hopefully still have some time for questions. if folks have them.
There was a question, and we touched on it a little bit in the chat, about the secretary standards and, you know, accessibility and code compliance, and kind of how we fit those two together. So Caitlin, since your programs complement each other, it's really nice to have you both weigh in on it, and, you know, knowing that the RSF program can help with planning.
Yeah, well, accessibility is really important. And so even when we're dealing with historic buildings, if they're public buildings, we really want to encourage folks to make them as fully accessible. I think there's no doubt that it can sometimes be challenging when you're talking about a historic building, how to do that in a way that's sensitive to the historic building. And that's something that we're all happy to work with people on in a case-by-case basis. You know, what works on one building isn't necessarily going to work on another building. So there's a lot of different considerations that we take into account when we're thinking about how to crack that nut, how to make it happen. But having those conversations with us early, we can help you figure out, okay, maybe this is a good location on this building to provide accessibility. You know, it has access to the accessible parking. It provides a clear path of travel. It's going to have less of an impact on the historic building, that kind of thing. What kind of materials would be appropriate to use? Again, it's going to be specific to, you know, what your existing building is made of. And there's some buildings where a wooden ramp might be preferable, and others where it might be a metal ramp, for example. It really depends.
Yeah, and if you're working on accessibility, and you know, there may be, your architects may be able to help you if you have one, but also there are a few, not a lot, but there are some accessibility consultants out there who may be able to help you as well. And that might be something, I think, Jenna, you said the RSF grants might be able to help with. So those kinds of things are important as well. And also just wanted to mention, with cultural facilities grants, we've been talking about historic buildings, but for cultural facilities grants, they just need to be an existing building. It doesn't necessarily have to be a historic building for our program. So that's just, probably many of you, or if not most, all of you have some sort of a historic building for a library, but I just thought I'd mention, at least for our program, it's not a requirement there. So.
And to echo that, the Robert Sensorbo Fund can help with accessibility planning. And that's something that, as a technical assistance provider, happy to look at plans. We can look and say, okay, there might be some red flags in terms of where an addition is placed, or where you're thinking about putting a lift, especially in a historic building. When we talk about kind of primary and secondary spaces, we're happy to kind of look at things in advance, or connect you with architects and consultants who are great at incorporating accessibility improvements into historic buildings and doing it in a way that's sensitive and would meet grant making requirements.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is, even if it's a historic building, it's important that it's accessible, and we want to work with people to find creative and sensitive ways to achieve accessibility.
All right, looks like we're almost out of time. Maybe one more question if anybody wants to ask any. We have about 3 minutes left, but.
So this is Joy. I want to say thank you, and that I left an evaluation link in the chat for this workshop. I also have a question about those services you were just mentioning. Like, if someone has ADA questions, is there a fee for those if they were to call, get in touch with you at the Preservation Trust and ask for that help?
From a technical assistance perspective, no. Like I said, it is our job to help you all navigate these projects. If you start talking about hiring an architect to develop plans, that would have a fee associated with it, but the Robert Sensorbo Fund can help offset some of the cost of that.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you so much. I know, at least for me, I've seen a couple emails come in already from libraries, and so thank you for reaching out. And we'll be in touch. Myself, Jackson, Lisa, we'll be in touch in the next few days to kind of move forward with you. And please feel free to reach out at any point in time. Next few days, weeks, 2 years into the future, we'll be around.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone.
I guess I get to end it, don't I? I'm going to stop.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks,
Stop
Caitlin.
Okay,
recording.
thanks.